Well, welcome to our next episode of Do You Know? It's a series that is introducing us to people that have had an influence on the culture of South Africa. You are South African, aren't you? But neither you nor me are the first people. Well, maybe you're a descendant of the first people, or maybe you're not. But I would like to know, who are the first people? So let's talk to Calvin Gilfellan. He's the CEO of the Castle of Good Hope. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jolene, and thank you for, almost making my Friday morning in the beautiful Cape Town, looking over the front courtyard where you were confronted with the almost the weaponized nature of the concept of First Nation.
Yes.
Because so many people claim that title, that it has become so individualized, it becomes so, as I say, weaponized, it becomes so confrontational, that I'm hoping that in my professional lifetime still, I would get people closer to a more conciliatory stance, and that they all realize that all 7 billion people on Mother Earth today descended from one African ancestor 100,000 years ago. So every person after that is actually second. So I normally take out the anger. I say it often facetiously, but it takes also out the anger, especially if you sit with a diverse group, as you've experienced yesterday. There would be Namas, there would be Orinaikwas, Griquas, and all, trying to be on this ladder of First Nationhood. So that I think indeed you are framing this thing correctly. Who is the First Nation?
What do you say? What do you say, Calvin?
I say that if we look at history deep enough, if we look at all the linguistic evidence, if we look at all the archaeological evidence, if we look at the geological evidence, geomorphological evidence, anthropological evidence, then certainly the people of Khoi descent cannot rightfully call themselves the first people. If anybody can call themselves first people, it would be maybe the San people of the Northern Cape, Namibia. Because if you look at the Genome Project at UCT, the oldest DNA, human DNA, is found in the people, they call themselves Bushmen or San people of Namibia. And I think even amongst them, they also have this dilemma of who really are the first people. But I think I want to declare my own personal interest in here. I am from Khoi descent, from British descent, also from maybe the Eastern descent. But I'm happy with my identity, and I don't weaponize my First Nation indigenous identity at the expense of others, because then I dehumanize myself and dehumanize other people. Because you see, when you try to categorize and say who's first on the ladder, then you become confrontational, you become destructive, and you do not build a common humanity. And I often look, when we argue, and how the kids are actually looking at us, why are you fighting? Why is identity such a big issue for you? And it comes down to economics. Eventually it comes down to the stomach. So if King Goodwill's Wellatini can get, 16 million rand a year to sustain the Zulu traditional house, while the Cape Khoi not have the same, it comes down, unfortunately, comes down to the economics. And the man whom we buried yesterday, Oki, a Griqua leader, in my personal exchanges with him, was dead against that. He carried the spirit, the cultural spirit of a forgotten people forward. And I think I'm more interested in that. And people will say, yeah, but you are settled, you are CEO, you get your monthly income, whatever. But it's not that. I think at the heart of it, people who call themselves first people must take a step back and say that, we were part of the colonial powers when we went on these San hunts, when we hunted the Bushmen. And so why did we do that? That was an inhumane act. You can't say the colonizers forced you to go out and hunt the San people. You were willingly part of that. And once you start to look at history, warts and all, then you will be able to say that maybe the entire world population is First Nation because we descended from one African ancestor. So that's how I take almost the sting out of this debate. And Jolene, I know that the UN, the United Nations cultural, organization has had a declaration where they declare the Khoi and the San people as the first people of South Africa. But I think it's built on a false narrative that the evolution of the southern part of Africa, because there was no South Africa. So if you say you are First Nation of what? Of the colonial boundaries? Or of where you stayed, or you think your ancestors stayed 400, 500 years or 1,000 years ago? So there's a geographical, there's a social, there's a historical complexity that I think just get lost because people are pursuing narrow interest when they deal with that. Yeah.
Calvin, but why do you think this all happened? Is it all to do with politics? But you mentioned economics, but is there not a deeper, just normal social thing?
It is, and it's complex, because if you look at how the Cape, let's focus on the Cape, for instance, the first people, or the claim for first people within the Cape, then we need to look at the relationship between people who claim First Nationhood in the Cape and the Eastern Cape people, the so-called Amaxhosa, and that we need to look at that element. We also need to look at the Eastern element, the fact that slaves, after a couple of years, when Van Riebeeck landed here in 1652, slave people, mostly from the African continent, nogal. It's very important that the slaves came from Angola and Madagascar first, before they came from Indonesia and Java and those places. So I think the issue of the social relations that you're talking about is very complex, and the hierarchy introduced by the colonial masters also contributed to that conflict. So from the very beginning, it was divide and rule. A slave was better than a Khoi. A Khoi was better off than a San. All of them were less off than the colonial masters. So it's a very complex thing. And I understand that if people are not literate, are not well read, that they will cling onto, the few straws that almost serves their own interest and their own aspirations, and kind of promote that as the only truth. And that's, for me, the danger of firstism. It's often built on pieces, as we call it, pick up stompies, and then build a narrative out of that is as dangerous as the colonial narrative.
Well, Calvin, I can't say that you have completely clarified the thing for me, but I really understand what you're saying, and I really, really appreciate that we had this short talk. I just would like you to, in a few sentences, just tell us, what can we use to let people in South Africa know a little bit more about this? The Camissa Museum? Is that a
First of all,
place?
yes, there are two very important issues. You've mentioned one only. The other one is the understanding of the Traditional Khoi and San Act and what that implies. What does it go beyond recognition? Because all the Khoi people and the people that confronted you yesterday always said to me, but you don't recognize us. You call us coloreds, you scraped us, you changed us from Khoi and San and Busters to colored people. And in that, you're trying to emasculate us. You're trying to make us less human. You also try to take the fact away that we were the first people. So I'm saying through education, we can do that. I think firstly from the X side, government must do more to empower communities to understand that, and especially the San revivalist communities. Because there is a small but vibrant Khoi revivalist movement, but it does not necessarily mean that they speak for all people of Khoi or San descent. So there's a huge gap between government, the activists, and the communities involved. So there's a lot of a work to be done, and it must be brought in the primary school, in the curriculums, that people have an understanding of that. My daughter is doing history, and there are elements of this is brought in, and they make comparisons with how dangerous it is if identity is weaponized. What happened in Nazi Germany, what happened in Rwanda, what happened in Maracana, what happened under apartheid, what happened in your other home country, Namibia, with the Namas and the Hererus, and so it's very dangerous if there is this enforced identity of who's first, who's second, who's third, and the bloodshed that can be associated. That's government's role. Our role, my role as an activist, as a social activist, as a cultural activist, is to use my current profession to as a magnet to get people here and to educate them. And the Camisa Museum, I'm more than a museum, Camisa Heritage Movement is part of a process to restore false historical narratives. To say that if you're Xhosa, if you're Sesotho, if you're Khoi, if you're San, the dynamics of Southern Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa was of such a nature that there was intermingling, there was economics exchanges, there was trade amongst all of us. And the Camisa Museum's objective is to address that falsehood and is to develop an inclusive narrative, almost a meta-narrative that says we are much closer. There are more ties, as Patrick, my friend Tarek Malik said, that bind us than rivers and mountains that divide us. That's the purpose of the Camisa, to say that we are common humanity, and that's why it's so important for me to support this project.
I'd support that 100% as well. But where can people get hold of it, or where can people view it?
You know, one of the beauties of COVID-19 is that it almost drove us in a corner to rethink our approach to memorization and museology, and in your case, tourism and cultural tourism. So what we've done, we've identified a significant space in the castle, in the old recruitment offices of the castle, to build this Camisa Museum. But because of COVID-19, we couldn't do the physical museums first. So in a historical first, what we've done is to do the virtual museum first. So the virtual museum exists on camisamuseum.co.za, and the physical museum will follow after that. But the amount of information that sits on that camisamuseum.co.za is staggering. And you can do so much more in the virtual space, in the electronic space, than you can do in the physical space. Because in the physical space, people are confined, and you almost confine their minds. You almost steer them. You almost, indoctrinate them to move in a particular era, from linearly. But in the virtual world, they can start anywhere. There is no beginning and no end. You can start in the middle, you can start at the end, you can jump back. And I think that's the beauty of that museum. There's a lot of information that will address some of the things that I only scratch on the surface. And I know I invaded your First Nations concept, but my personal view after 8 years of dealing with this matter is that there's no group that can solely claim First Nationhood in South Africa today.
Calvin, thank you so much, and really I appreciate it more than I can say. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Delene. A lovely day.
You too, thanks.